I'm Emma Milton, 38 years old, and I worked my way up from a small-town upbringing to becoming a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. For years, I showed up for my family, rides, bills, favors, support, no questions asked. But the day my aunt whispered to the whole room that I had a sugar daddy, right as I walked in wearing my uniform, something in me shifted. That moment, public, careless, humiliating, forced me to make a choice I'd avoided for years. Have you ever been dismissed, belittled, or talked down to by someone you've poured yourself into? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after someone crossed a line, tap the like button and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, respect, and finally choosing yourself. What happened after that whisper surprised everyone. I was 12 the first time Aunt Lorraine looked at me like I was a problem to solve. We were at my grandmother's house, and I'd accidentally knocked over a glass of sweet tea. Before I could grab a towel, Lorraine was already standing, already sighing, already making it clear that I was the kind of child who required management. She didn't clean it up herself. She directed my mother to do it while explaining, loudly enough for everyone to hear, that children needed structure. I remember thinking even then that she didn't mean structure. She meant control. That pattern followed me through adolescence. Family gatherings always felt like auditions I hadn't prepared for. Lorraine would arrive with opinions already formed. My clothes were too casual. My grades were good, but not exceptional. My hobbies were fine, but not impressive. She never asked what I wanted. She told me what I should want. A degree in education, maybe nursing. Something stable. Something that wouldn't make waves. When I told the family I was enlisting, Lorraine's reaction was immediate. She pulled my mother aside at Thanksgiving and said, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen, that the military was no place for a young woman. That I'd regret choosing boots over a family. That I was being stubborn just to prove a point. My mother defended me quietly, but Lorraine's voice always carried further. I went anyway. I joined ROTC, earned my commission as a second lieutenant, and learned quickly that the military didn't care about Lorraine's expectations. It cared about competence. I could handle that. The years that followed were a blur of assignments, evaluations, and steady upward movement. I made captain by my early 30s, and the work felt right in a way civilian life never had. There were rules, yes, but they were clear. You followed them or you didn't. You earned respect or you didn't. There was no room for passive-aggressive commentary disguised as concern. But Lorraine never respected it. At family events, she'd introduce me as the one in the military, the way you'd mention someone's unusual hobby. She'd ask if I'd met anyone, as if my rank insignia were just a placeholder until I found a husband. When I explained my work, logistics, personnel management, coordinating cross-unit operations, her eyes would glaze over. Then she'd change the subject to her friend's daughter, who'd just gotten engaged. What she never acknowledged were the other things I did. The times I helped her with bills when her hours got cut. The afternoon I spent untangling her retirement paperwork. The weekend I drove her to 3 different medical appointments because no one else volunteered. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because that's what family does. But Lorraine didn't see it as generosity. She saw it as obligation. My obligation. I met General Marcus Keene during a mobility rotation early in my career. He was a colonel then, running a joint task force, and I was a lieutenant fresh out of my first command course. He stopped by our section during an inspection, asked a few questions about our supply chain redundancies, and actually waited for my answers. Most senior officers don't. They ask, nod, and move on. He listened. Months later, I got orders for a planning program I hadn't applied for. When I asked my commander how I'd been selected, he said someone had flagged my file. It took me a year to realize it was Keene. By then, he was a 2-star and I was working under a different chain of command. But his endorsement had opened doors I didn't even know existed. We stayed in touch sporadically, emails after major assignments, brief conversations at joint conferences. It was always professional. He'd ask about my career progression, offer guidance when I hit bureaucratic walls, and occasionally remind me that the Air Force needed more officers who could think beyond their immediate rank. I respected him more than almost anyone I'd served with. Lorraine, of course, had no idea who he was. She didn't follow my career closely enough to know the names that mattered. By the time I made major, I'd stopped expecting her to understand. I drove home for family gatherings in a government-issued sedan, mentally preparing for the same tired questions. Have you thought about settling down? Don't you want kids? Isn't it exhausting, all that responsibility? I'd smile, redirect, and leave early. I didn't realize how much I'd been carrying until I stopped expecting anything to change. I kept helping because it was easier than explaining why I wouldn't. I kept attending events because absence felt like failure. I kept absorbing Lorraine's comments because confrontation felt too costly. But something was shifting. I noticed it in small moments, the way I'd pause before answering her calls, the way I'd calculate how much energy a visit would cost. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of being useful but not valued. Tired of being questioned but not trusted. Tired of watching Lorraine take credit for encouraging me when she'd spent years doing the opposite. The last time I helped her before everything changed, she asked me to co-sign a loan. I said no. It was the first time I'd ever refused her directly. She acted wounded, said she thought family helped each other. I didn't argue. I just said I wasn't comfortable with it. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. When she finally called, she didn't mention the loan. She asked if I could pick her up from the mechanic. I said I had duty. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my office that night, staring at my calendar, realizing that I'd spent years managing Lorraine's emergencies while she treated my career like an inconvenient distraction. I thought about all the times I'd rearranged my schedule, all the money I'd sent, all the favors I'd done without asking for anything in return. And I thought about how little of it mattered to her. The next family gathering was in 3 weeks. I almost didn't go. But my mother asked, and I couldn't say no to her. So I went, already bracing for whatever Lorraine would say this time. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd let her speak about me that way. I didn't know General Keene would be the one to walk through the door. I didn't know that everything I'd been quietly enduring was about to become impossible to ignore. I just knew I was tired. And that being tired was no longer enough of a reason to stay silent. The gathering was at my cousin Talia's house, a sprawling rental she could barely afford, but insisted on keeping for appearances. I arrived mid-afternoon, parking the sedan along the curb. It wasn't flashy, government vehicles never are, but it was clean, reliable, and marked with base decals that most people wouldn't notice. Lorraine noticed. I saw her standing near the front window with 2 of my cousins, Jordan and Talia. They were looking out at the car, and even from the driveway, I could see Lorraine's expression shift. Not curiosity. Suspicion. I grabbed my bag and walked in. My mother greeted me first, pulling me into a hug that felt more relieved than happy. She'd been managing Lorraine all afternoon, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "How was the drive?" she asked. "Fine. Quiet." Lorraine appeared before I could say anything else. She looked at me, then passed me toward the window, then back at me. "That's a nice car, Emma." "It's a government vehicle." "Right." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Must be nice, having access to things like that." I didn't respond. I'd learned years ago that engaging with Lorraine's implications only made them louder. The afternoon passed in the usual rhythms: small talk, reheated casseroles, people asking me surface-level questions about my work while clearly not caring about the answers. I was used to it. I sat near my mother, contributed when spoken to, and watched the clock. Then I overheard it. Lorraine was in the kitchen with Talia and Jordan, standing just close enough to the living room that her voice carried. She wasn't whispering. She wanted to be heard. "She is a sugar daddy," Lorraine said. "It's disgusting." Talia laughed nervously. "Aunt Lorraine, you don't know that. Look at that expensive car." "You think she bought that herself?" Jordan glanced toward the living room, clearly uncomfortable. "She's in the Air Force. They probably assign, please." Lorraine's voice sharpened. "Women don't get promoted that fast without help. Someone's taking care of her." I felt my mother stiffen beside me. She started to stand, but I put a hand on her arm. "Don't. Emma, she can't. Let her finish." I didn't want my mother fighting this battle. I wanted to hear exactly what Lorraine was willing to say when she thought I wasn't listening. Talia's voice dropped. Do you really think I know? Lorraine said. She's been showing up to these things looking more polished, acting like she's untouchable. That doesn't happen on a captain's salary. I'd been a major for 6 months. She didn't even know my rank. Jordan tried again. Maybe she's just good at her job. Or maybe she's good at other things. Lorraine laughed, and the sound made my stomach turn. You don't climb that fast in the military without sleeping your way up. Everyone knows it. The room went quiet. A few people had started listening. My mother stood, her face flushed, but I shook my head. Not yet. She sat back down, shaking. I stayed still, running through my options. I could leave. I could confront her privately. I could let my mother handle it. But none of those felt right. None of those addressed what Lorraine had just done, publicly accused me of prostitution, questioned my integrity, and reduced years of work to a transaction. Then the doorbell rang. Talia frowned. I'm not expecting anyone else. I stood. I am. I walked to the door and opened it. General Marcus Keene stood on the porch in full-service dress uniform, 4 stars on his shoulders, ribbons across his chest, the kind of presence that makes a room straighten instinctively. He looked at me and nodded. Major Milton. General Keene. Ready for your briefing? Yes, sir. Behind me, the house had gone completely silent. I could feel every pair of eyes on us. I stepped aside and Keene entered, his posture relaxed, but unmistakably authoritative. He glanced around the room, his gaze landing briefly on Lorraine, who'd gone pale. Then he looked back at me. I'll wait in the car. Take your time. Thank you, sir. He left. The door closed. No one moved. I turned to face the room. Lorraine was staring at me like I'd just pulled a gun. Talia's mouth was open. Jordan looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. My mother's expression was somewhere between pride and fury. I looked directly at Lorraine. That's General Marcus Keene. 4-star. He's my mentor. We're briefing on a classified assignment tomorrow morning at 0700 hours. Lorraine's lips moved, but no sound came out. I continued, my voice calm. The car outside is assigned to me because I'm currently attached to his directorate. The promotions I've earned came from my service record, my leadership evaluations, and my performance under combat-adjacent conditions. Someone coughed. I didn't look to see who. I've spent the last 8 years of my career working in joint operations, logistics coordination, and personnel management. I've deployed twice. I've been awarded 3 commendations. And I've done it without anyone's help except the people who believed I was capable. Lorraine finally found her voice. Emma, I didn't mean yes, you did. I wasn't angry. I was clear. You meant exactly what you said. You've spent years assuming the worst about me because it was easier than respecting what I've actually done. Talia stepped forward. Emma, she was just joking. No, she wasn't. I looked at Lorraine again. You told this room I'm sleeping my way through my career. You called me a prostitute in everything but words. And you did it because you've never once taken me seriously. My mother stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Lorraine's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I didn't know you didn't ask. I picked up my bag. My mother followed me toward the door. Before I left, I turned back one more time. The general's waiting. I have a briefing to prepare for. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I walked out. My mother came with me. Behind us, the house stayed silent. Keene was leaning against the sedan, arms crossed. He straightened when he saw us. Everything all right, Major? Yes, sir. Good. He opened the passenger door for my mother, then looked at me. We'll talk logistics tomorrow. Take the night. Thank you, sir. He got into his vehicle and pulled away. My mother and I stood in the driveway, neither of us speaking. Finally, she said, you didn't have to leave. Yes, I did. She nodded. I'm proud of you. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired and finally, unmistakably clear about what I was willing to tolerate. We got into the sedan. I started the engine. And I drove us both away from the only family gathering I'd ever walked out of. I didn't go back to base that night. I drove my mother to her house, made sure she was settled, and then sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to decide what to do next. I didn't want to be alone, but I didn't want company either. I wanted the kind of clarity that only comes from distance. Eventually, I drove to the visiting officer's quarters and checked in. The room was small, sterile, and exactly what I needed. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, replaying the afternoon in my head. Not the confrontation. That part felt clean, almost inevitable. What I kept replaying were all the moments before it, years of small dismissals, casual disrespect, and my own willingness to absorb it all without protest. I'd told myself I was being patient, mature, the bigger person. But really, I'd just been afraid. Afraid that setting boundaries would make me the problem. Afraid that defending myself would prove Lorraine right somehow, that I was difficult, ungrateful, unwilling to keep the peace. So I'd stayed quiet, kept helping, and swallowed every comment that felt like a small knife. I thought about calling someone. Captain Rhea Collins, my XO, would have understood. But it was late, and this wasn't a work crisis. It was personal. And I'd spent so long keeping those two worlds separate that I didn't know how to let them touch. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started drafting an email to Keen, thanking him for showing up. I got 3 sentences in and deleted all of them. He didn't need my gratitude. He'd done what any decent mentor would do, shown up when it mattered. I closed the laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the full weight of what Lorraine had said. Not just today, but across every gathering, every phone call, every moment she'd made me feel like my career was something to apologize for. She'd never celebrated a single promotion. Never asked about my deployments. Never acknowledged the work it took to get where I was. And when she finally did pay attention, it was only to tear me down in the most humiliating way possible. I thought about my mother's face in that room, the way she'd looked at Lorraine with something close to disgust. My mother, who avoided conflict like a disease, had been ready to fight. That meant something. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant the hurt I'd been minimizing for years was real. I fell asleep in my uniform, too exhausted to change. The next morning, I reported to Keen's office at 0700 hours. He was already there, reviewing briefing documents, a cup of coffee going cold on his desk. He looked up when I entered. "Major." "Sir." "Sit." I sat. He closed the folder in front of him and leaned back, studying me with the kind of directness that made junior officers squirm. I held his gaze. "You want to talk about yesterday?" he asked. "No, sir." "Good. Neither do I." He paused. "But I will say this, what your aunt said was out of line. And what you did was appropriate." I nodded, unsure what to say. He continued. "I've seen a lot of officers, men and women, deal with family members who don't respect the uniform. Most of them let it slide because it's easier than confronting it. You didn't. That takes guts." "It didn't feel like guts, sir. It felt like I'd just had enough. That's usually when guts show up." He picked up his coffee, realized it was cold, and set it back down. "You've been working under my directorate for 6 months. In that time, you've coordinated 3 joint operations, streamlined personnel transitions across 4 units, and solved a logistics bottleneck that 2 colonels couldn't figure out. Your work speaks for itself." "Thank you, sir. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it so you remember it the next time someone tries to rewrite your story." He slid a folder across the desk. "This is your next assignment. It's a 14-month rotation with increased visibility. If you perform the way I think you will, you'll be in the zone for lieutenant colonel within 2 years." I opened the folder. My hands didn't shake, but they wanted to. "Understood, sir. One more thing." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Your aunt's opinion of you doesn't matter. Your mother's does. Everyone else is noise." "Yes, sir." I left his office feeling steadier than I had in months. Not because he'd validated me, though that helped, but because he'd reminded me of something I'd forgotten. My career wasn't up for debate. It was a fact. And facts don't need defending. I spent the rest of the day buried in work, grateful for the distraction. But by evening, my phone had 17 missed calls. 12 from Lorraine. 3 from Talia. 2 from Jordan. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to. I knew what they'd say, some version of "you overreacted," or "family should forgive," or "she didn't mean it that way." But I'd heard what she meant. and I wasn't interested in letting her rewrite it. Instead, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring. Emma. Hey, Mom. How are you? I'm fine. You? She sighed. Lorraine's been calling. She wants to apologize. Does she? She says she didn't realize how it sounded. I closed my eyes. Mom, she knew exactly how it sounded. That's why she said it. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, I know. You do. I've known for a long time that Lorraine doesn't treat you the way she should. I just didn't know how to say it without making things worse. You're not responsible for her behavior. I know. But I'm your mother. I should have said something sooner. You were there yesterday. That's what mattered. She exhaled, and I could hear the relief in it. What are you going to do? Nothing for now. I'm not interested in her apology. Not yet. She's going to keep calling. Let her. My mother laughed, just a little. You sound like your father. I smiled. My father had died when I was 16, but I still remembered his voice, calm and immovable when he'd made up his mind. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. We talked for a few more minutes, nothing heavy, just the rhythm of a conversation between two people who understood each other. When we hung up, I felt lighter. The calls from Lorraine continued for 3 more days. I didn't answer. On the 4th day, she left a voicemail that was part apology, part justification, part plea. I deleted it halfway through. Talia sent a text. Aunt Lorraine's really upset. Can you just talk to her? I replied, not right now. Jordan followed up an hour later. She didn't mean it the way it came out. You know how she is. I almost responded. Almost typed out everything I'd been holding back for years. But I stopped myself. Because explaining wouldn't change anything. Jordan wasn't asking me to set the record straight. He was asking me to make peace so everyone else could feel comfortable again. I wasn't interested in that anymore. Instead, I focused on work. The new assignment Keen had given me was demanding, detail-heavy, and exactly the kind of challenge I thrived on. I coordinated briefings, streamlined communications between units, and spent long hours troubleshooting problems that didn't have obvious solutions. It felt good. It felt like proof. 3 weeks after the gathering, Captain Rhea Collins stopped by my office. She knocked once and walked in, closing the door behind her. You've been avoiding me, she said. I've been busy. Busy or hiding? I looked up from my computer. Rhea had been my XO for 2 years, and she had a talent for cutting through evasion. Both. She sat down across from me. I heard what happened. Your cousin posted something vague on social media, and people started talking. I groaned. Of course she did. She didn't name names, but it wasn't hard to figure out. Rhea leaned forward. You okay? I'm fine. Emma. I sighed. I'm fine. Really. It just took me by surprise. The accusation, or the fact that you finally pushed back? I didn't answer right away. Rhea waited, patient as always. The second one, I admitted. I didn't know I had it in me. Everyone who's worked with you knew you had it in you. You've just never had to use it outside of work. It didn't feel good. It's not supposed to. Setting boundaries never does. She paused. But you know what feels worse? Letting people walk all over you for years and pretending it doesn't hurt. I looked at her, surprised by how closely she'd nailed it. She shrugged. I've been there. Different family, same dynamic. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop pretending everything's fine. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Rhea stood. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Thanks. And if your aunt keeps calling, feel free to forward her to me. I'm great at handling difficult personalities. I laughed, and it felt like the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. After she left, I sat at my desk and thought about what she'd said. About boundaries. About pretending. About the difference between keeping the peace and keeping yourself small. I thought about Lorraine, sitting in her house, probably convinced she was the victim in all this. I thought about my cousins, uncomfortable with the tension, but unwilling to acknowledge why it existed. I thought about all the people who'd rather I apologize just to make things easier. And I realized I didn't owe any of them that. I owed them honesty. I owed them consistency. But I didn't owe them comfort at the expense of my own dignity. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. 4 days later, I called Lorraine. She answered on the second ring, her voice wary. Emma. Lorraine. Silence. Then, I've been trying to reach you. I know. I wanted to apologize. Okay. Another pause. She'd been expecting resistance, maybe anger. My calm seemed to throw her off. I didn't mean what I said, she continued. I was joking. You know how I am. I do know how you are. That's the problem. Emma, let me finish. My voice stayed level, professional. The same tone I used in briefings. What you said wasn't a joke. It was an accusation. You told a room full of people that I'm sleeping my way through my career. You questioned my integrity, my work, and my character. And you did it because you've never respected what I do. That's not true. I've always been proud of you. No, you haven't. You've spent years making comments about my choices, dismissing my work, and treating me like I'm useful when you need something and embarrassing when I don't fit your expectations. She started to protest, but I kept going. I've helped you for years. Financially, logistically, emotionally. And you've never once acknowledged it. You treat my support like an obligation, not a kindness. And when I finally show up in a way that doesn't fit your narrative, you decide I must be doing something shameful. I didn't realize, yes, you did. I wasn't angry. I was clear. You realized exactly what you were saying. You just didn't think I'd hear it. And you definitely didn't think I'd respond. She was quiet. I could hear her breathing on the other end, uneven and shallow. I'm not calling to make you feel better, I said. I'm calling to tell you what's going to happen now. I'm not helping with errands anymore. I'm not covering bills. I'm not answering calls that start with you needing something. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to be based on mutual respect, not convenience. That's not fair. It's completely fair. Family helps each other, Emma. Family respects each other, Lorraine. You haven't done that. Another long silence. Then, quietly, I don't know what you want from me. I want you to understand what you did. And I want you to stop pretending it was harmless. I said I was sorry. You said you didn't mean it. That's not the same thing. She exhaled, frustrated. So what, you're just cutting me off? I'm setting a boundary. If that feels like being cut off, that says more about you than it does about me. She didn't respond. I waited, giving her space to say something real. Something that acknowledged the harm instead of deflecting it. But she didn't. Instead, she said, I think you're being dramatic. Okay, Emma, if that's what you think, then we don't have anything else to talk about right now. You can't just, I can. I'll talk to you when you're ready to take this seriously. Until then, I need space. I hung up. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I felt no guilt, no second guessing. Just a strange, quiet relief. Within an hour, my phone lit up with texts from Jordan and Talia, both asking what happened, both implying I'd been too harsh. I didn't respond. My mother called that evening. Lorraine says you yelled at her. I didn't yell. I set a boundary. She's upset. I know. But I'm not responsible for managing her feelings about being held accountable. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, good. I blinked. Good. Good. I'm glad you said it. I've been watching her treat you like this for years, and I didn't know how to stop it without causing a fight. But you did. And I'm proud of you. I felt my throat tighten. Thanks, Mom. She'll come around eventually. Or she won't. But either way, you did the right thing. We talked for a few more minutes, and when we hung up, I felt something shift inside me, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally starting to lift. The fallout was immediate. Lorraine stopped calling. Jordan sent one more text asking me to reconsider, then went quiet. Talia posted something vague on social media about family loyalty that I ignored. But the most surprising part was how little it hurt. I'd spent years afraid that setting boundaries would destroy relationships. But the relationship I'd been protecting didn't really exist. It was built on my compliance, not mutual respect. And the moment I stopped complying, it collapsed. I didn't miss it. What I did notice was the space it left behind, space for work that mattered, for people who valued me, for a version of myself that wasn't constantly bracing for criticism. 3 months later, I got the call. Lieutenant Colonel. The promotion I'd been working toward for years, earned through performance reviews, leadership evaluations, and a service record that spoke for itself. Keen called personally to congratulate me. "You've earned this, Emma. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." "I won't, sir." "Good. Now get back to work." The ceremony was small, attended by my mother, Ria, and a handful of officers I'd worked with over the years. Lorraine wasn't there. I hadn't invited her. Not out of spite, just clarity. She hadn't been part of this journey. She didn't get to celebrate the destination. Afterward, my mother hugged me tightly. "Your father would have been so proud." "I know. I am too. I know that too." We went to dinner, just the two of us, and talked about everything except Lorraine. It felt easy. Natural. Like we'd finally stopped carrying someone else's weight. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, eager to help, afraid to set boundaries, convinced that being useful was the same as being valued. I thought about the woman I was now, clear-eyed, grounded, unwilling to shrink for the comfort of people who didn't respect her. And I realized the real victory wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't the promotion. It wasn't even the boundary I'd set. It was this. I'd stopped waiting for Lorraine to see me. I'd started seeing myself. And that made all the difference. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Not silent, just free of unnecessary noise. Lorraine didn't reach out. I didn't either. The extended family went on with their gatherings, and I stopped attending most of them. Not out of anger, but practicality. I had work, responsibilities, a life that didn't revolve around proving myself to people who'd already decided what they thought of me. My mother kept me updated in broad strokes. Lorraine was struggling more than she'd let on. Without my help, bills piled up. Tech issues went unresolved. The small emergencies she used to call me for became larger problems because she waited too long to address them. "She's too proud to ask anyone else," my mother said during one of our calls. "That's not my problem to solve anymore." "I know. I'm not asking you to. I just thought you should know." I appreciated that, my mother understanding the difference between informing me and guilting me. It was a boundary she'd learned to respect, and it made our relationship stronger. Work became my anchor. The assignment under Keen's directorate was everything he'd promised: challenging, high visibility, and exactly the kind of responsibility I thrived under. I coordinated joint operations across 3 branches, streamlined communication protocols that had been broken for years, and solved logistical problems that senior officers had been ignoring because they were too complicated to address. I loved it. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Every decision I made had weight. Every solution I implemented had impact. And no one questioned whether I'd earned my seat at the table. Ria and I worked closely during this period, and she became more than just my XO. She became a friend. Someone who understood the specific pressures of being a woman in a male-dominated field without making it the center of every conversation. One evening, after a particularly long briefing, we grabbed coffee in the base commissary. She stirred her cup absently, then looked at me. "You seem different." "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying something anymore." I thought about that. "I'm not. Your aunt." "Mostly." I paused. I spent years trying to manage her expectations, her emotions, her perception of me. I didn't realize how exhausting it was until I stopped. "Do you regret cutting her off?" I didn't cut her off. I just stopped letting her treat me like I was disposable. I sipped my coffee. If she wants to rebuild, she knows what it'll take. But I'm not chasing her approval anymore. Ria nodded. That's growth. It feels more like survival. Sometimes they're the same thing. 6 months into my new assignment, I got a call from Jordan. It was the first time any of my cousins had reached out since the fallout. "Hey, Emma." "Jordan. I know it's been a while." "It has." He hesitated. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I handled things. I should have said something when Aunt Lorraine was talking about you. I just didn't know how." I appreciated the honesty. "Why are you calling now?" "Because she's not doing well. And I think she misses you." "She won't say it, but I can tell." "That's not my responsibility, Jordan." "I know. I'm not asking you to fix it. I just thought you should know." I thought about that for a moment. Is she willing to actually apologize? Not for how it sounded, but for what she said. I don't know. I think she still believes she was joking. Then there's nothing to rebuild. Jordan sighed. I figured you'd say that. If she wants to talk, she knows how to reach me. But I'm not pretending it didn't happen just to make everyone comfortable. Fair enough. He paused. For what it's worth, I get it now. Why you left. Why you set boundaries. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Thanks, Jordan. Take care, Emma. You too. After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Jordan had finally acknowledged what happened. Sadness that it took this long, and that Lorraine still hadn't. But I wasn't waiting for her anymore. A year after the confrontation, I received orders for a new posting, a senior staff position that would position me for consideration for full colonel within 3 years. It was exactly the kind of trajectory I'd been working toward since I commissioned. Keene called me into his office the day the orders came through. Congratulations, Emma. Thank you, sir. This is a significant assignment. It's going to test you in ways you haven't been tested before. I'm ready. He studied me for a moment. I believe you are. You've grown considerably over the past year. Thank you, sir. I'm not just talking about your professional performance. He leaned back in his chair. You've developed a kind of clarity that a lot of officers never find. You know who you are. You know what you're worth. And you don't need external validation to confirm it. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't always. I know. That's what makes it impressive. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Whatever happens with your family, don't let it distract you from this. You've earned everything you've achieved. Don't let anyone rewrite that story. I won't, sir. I left his office feeling steadier than I'd felt in years. Not because he'd validated me, but because I finally believed it myself. That evening, I called my mother. I got new orders. Where? I told her. She was quiet for a moment, then said, That's incredible, Emma. It is. Your father would have been so proud. I know. She paused. Lorraine's been asking about you. What does she want to know? If you're okay. If you're happy. What did you tell her? I told her you're thriving. I smiled. Thanks, Mom. She misses you, I think. But she's still too stubborn to admit she was wrong. Then she'll keep missing me. My mother laughed softly. I don't blame you. We talked for a while longer, and when we hung up, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for it to be. The next morning, I went for a run on base, early, before the heat set in. The air was cool, the sky just starting to lighten, and for the first time in years, I felt completely present. Not thinking about what I should have said. Not replaying old arguments. Not wondering if I'd done enough, been enough, proved enough. Just running. Just breathing. Just being. And somewhere in the rhythm of my steps, I realized something. I'd spent years trying to earn Lorraine's respect. But I'd never needed it. What I'd needed was my own. And now I had it. The promotion ceremony for Lieutenant Colonel took place on a crisp autumn morning. The kind of day where the air feels clean and everything seems sharper, more defined. I stood in formation, my mother seated in the front row, Rhea beside her. A handful of colleagues I'd worked with over the years filled the rest of the chairs. It wasn't a large gathering, but it was the right one. Keene presided over the ceremony. His voice carried across the courtyard, clear and steady, as he read the promotion orders. When he pinned the silver oak leaf to my uniform, he leaned in slightly and said, Well done, Colonel. Thank you, sir. The applause was modest, but genuine. Afterward, people congratulated me, shook my hand, and asked about my next assignment. I answered their questions with the same calm professionalism I'd carried through every stage of my career. But inside, I felt something different. Not pride exactly, though that was there. It was more like vindication. Proof that everything I'd worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, every moment I'd pushed through doubt, it had all led here. And no one could take that from me. My mother hugged me tightly after the ceremony. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I know, Mom. Your father would have given anything to see this. I like to think he did. She pulled back, her eyes damp. He did. I'm sure of it. Rhea approached, grinning. Colonel Milton. Has a nice ring to it. It does, doesn't it? Drinks later. Absolutely. The rest of the day passed in a blur, handshakes, photos, brief conversations with officers I respected and a few I barely knew. But through it all, I kept coming back to the same thought. This was mine. I'd earned it. And I didn't owe anyone an explanation for how I got here. That evening, I returned to my quarters and sat on the edge of my bed, still in uniform. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages that had come in throughout the day. Congratulations from colleagues. A thoughtful note from Keen. A proud text from my mother. And, buried near the bottom, a message from Lorraine. I heard about your promotion. Congratulations. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a single sentence, carefully neutral, as if we were distant acquaintances rather than family. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide how I felt. Not angry. Not hurt. Just tired. Tired of waiting for her to understand. Tired of hoping she'd finally see me for who I was. Tired of carrying the weight of a relationship she'd never valued. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but clarity. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I deleted the message and set my phone aside. The next few months brought a new rhythm to my life. The senior staff position was demanding, but in the best possible way. I worked with officers from across the Air Force, coordinated initiatives that had real impact, and found myself in rooms where decisions were made that would shape policy for years to come. I thrived. Not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I finally wasn't. I also started doing things I'd neglected for years. I took up kayaking on the weekends, bought a small boat, and spent early mornings on the water, watching the sun rise over the base lake. I called old friends I'd lost touch with. I went to dinners without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I slept better than I had in years. For the first time since I could remember, I wasn't constantly bracing for the next criticism, the next demand, the next reminder that I wasn't enough. I was just living. Rhea noticed. One afternoon, over coffee, she said, "You seem really happy." "I am. It suits you." "Thanks." She smiled. "For what it's worth, I think cutting out the dead weight was the best decision you ever made." It wasn't easy. The right decisions rarely are. I thought about that. About how hard it had been to set boundaries with Lorraine. About how guilty I'd felt at first, how much I'd second-guessed myself. But that guilt had faded. And what replaced it was something stronger, self-respect. A year and a half after the confrontation, I got a call from Talia. "Emma, it's me." "Hey, Talia. I'm calling because Aunt Lorraine's in the hospital." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "She had a fall. Broke her hip. She's stable, but she's going to need help when she gets out." I closed my eyes. "And you're calling me because she's asking for you." "She has my number, Talia." "I know. But she's too proud to call." "That's not my problem." Talia sighed. "Emma, I know things are complicated. But she's family. And she needs help. She's needed help before. She's never had trouble asking me then. This is different." "How?" "Because she's scared. And she's alone." I felt a familiar tug, the old instinct to help, to fix, to be the person everyone could rely on. But I'd learned to recognize that tug for what it was, a habit, not an obligation. "Talia, I'm sorry she's hurt." "I really am. But I set boundaries for a reason. If she wants my help, she needs to apologize for what she said." Not a vague text. A real apology. She's in a hospital bed, Emma. And I'm not responsible for the fact that she has no one else to call. Talia was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "You've really changed." "I have. And I'm better for it." We hung up shortly after. I sat in my office, staring at the wall, trying to untangle what I felt. Guilt? A little. Sadness? Yes. But also clarity. Because this was exactly what Lorraine had always done, waited until she needed something, then expected me to drop everything and provide it. And when I didn't, I was the selfish one. I wasn't going to do that anymore. 2 days later, my mother called. "Did Talia reach you?" "She did." "Are you going to visit Lorraine?" "No." My mother was quiet. "Then, I understand." "Do you?" "I do. She hasn't earned it." I felt my throat tighten. Thanks, Mom. For what? For not asking me to be the bigger person. You've been the bigger person for years, Emma. It's not your job to keep doing it when the other person refuses to grow. We talked for a while longer, and when we hung up, I felt lighter. 3 weeks later, Lorraine was released from the hospital. Jordan and Talia helped her get settled at home, and from what I heard, she was managing slowly, but managing. She never called to apologize. And I never reached out. The relationship stayed exactly where I'd left it, paused, unresolved, and no longer my responsibility to fix. 6 months later, I received confirmation that I was being considered for promotion to full colonel within the next 2 years. The notification came via email, and I read it twice to make sure I'd understood correctly. Ria found me in my office an hour later, grinning. I heard, "Congratulations." "Thanks." "How does it feel?" "Surreal." "Good. Like everything I've worked for is finally coming together." "It is." She leaned against the doorframe. "You've earned this, Emma. Every bit of it." "I know. And I did. For the first time in my life, I didn't question whether I deserved success. I didn't wonder if I'd gotten lucky, or if someone had pulled strings, or if I'd somehow fooled everyone into thinking I was capable. I knew I was capable. I knew I'd earned it. And I didn't need anyone's permission to believe that. That evening, I went for a run longer than usual, just because I could. The sun was setting, the air was cool, and I felt a deep, quiet sense of peace. Not because everything in my life was perfect, but because I'd finally stopped trying to make it perfect for everyone else. I'd stopped shrinking. I'd stopped apologizing. I'd stopped carrying people who refused to walk beside me. And in doing that, I'd found something I'd been searching for my entire life: freedom. Not from responsibility, not from work, not from family, but from the belief that I had to earn my place in the world by making myself smaller. I didn't. I never did. And I wasn't going to anymore. 2 years later, I stood in front of another formation, this time as a full colonel. The silver eagle replaced the oak leaf, and the weight of it felt different, not heavier, but more certain. My mother was there again, older now but still beaming. Ria had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and stood beside her, looking proud. A few junior officers I'd mentored over the years filled the seats behind them. Lorraine wasn't there. I hadn't invited her. And for the first time, I felt no guilt about that. Keene, now retired but still sharp, gave a brief speech about leadership and integrity. He mentioned my name once, in passing, but the words that stayed with me weren't about me. They were about the kind of officer who leads by example rather than expectation. That's who I'd become. After the ceremony, people congratulated me, asked about my plans, and shared stories about working with me. I listened, smiled, and felt genuinely grateful. But the moment that mattered most came later, when my mother and I were alone. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Proud. Relieved. Like I finally made it." "You did more than make it, Emma. You thrived." I nodded. "I did." She reached for my hand. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see how much Lorraine hurt you." "Mom, no, let me say this." She squeezed my hand. "I spent years trying to keep the peace, and in doing that, I let her treat you in ways you didn't deserve. I should have stood up for you sooner. You stood up for me when it mattered. I wish I'd done it sooner. You did what you could. And you've been there every step since. That's what matters." She smiled, her eyes damp. "I love you, sweetheart." "I love you too, Mom." That evening, I sat on my back porch, looking out over the base. The sky was clear, the stars just beginning to appear, and I felt a deep, unshakable sense of contentment. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago, eager to help, afraid to disappoint, convinced that being useful was the same as being loved. I thought about the woman I was now, clear, grounded, and unwilling to compromise my dignity for the comfort of people who didn't value me. And I realized something: the real payoff wasn't the promotion. It wasn't the ceremony, or the recognition, or the career trajectory. It was this: I'd stopped living for other people's approval. I'd stopped waiting for permission to take up space. I'd stopped believing that my worth was tied to how much I could give without asking for anything in return. I'd finally, fully, completely stepped into the version of myself who felt free. And that freedom, quiet, earned, unshakable, was worth more than any rank I'd ever hold. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Ria. "Thanks for being there today." It meant a lot. She replied almost immediately, "Wouldn't have missed it." "You've come a long way, Colonel." I smiled and set my phone aside. I had come a long way. And I wasn't done yet. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing toward the next goal, the next achievement, the next thing that would prove I was enough. I was already enough. I'd always been enough. And now, finally, I believed it. The stars above grew brighter as the sky darkened, and I sat there for a long time, just breathing, just being, just feeling the weight of everything I'd carried and finally set down. Lorraine never apologized. She never acknowledged what she'd said or how it had hurt me. And eventually, I stopped expecting her to. Some people never grow. Some relationships never heal. And that's okay. Because healing isn't about them. It's about you. It's about recognizing when someone no longer deserves access to your life, your energy, your peace. It's about choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. And once you do that, once you truly choose yourself, everything changes. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But slowly, steadily, irrevocably. You stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop waiting for people who will never see you to finally open their eyes. You just live. Fully. Freely. Unapologetically. And that, more than any rank or title or achievement, is the real victory. I stood, stretched, and walked back inside. Tomorrow, I'd report for duty. I'd lead my team, make decisions that mattered, and continue building a career I was proud of. But tonight, I was just going to rest. Because I'd earned it. And I didn't need anyone's permission to believe that anymore. I never did. 30 years is a long time in any life. In a military career, it's nearly everything. I retired as a Major General, 2 stars, after 36 years of service. The ceremony was larger than I expected, attended by officers I'd mentored, colleagues I'd served alongside, and a few faces from my earliest assignments who I hadn't seen in decades. My mother had passed 5 years earlier, peacefully, in her sleep. She'd made it to my promotion to Brigadier General, and I was grateful for that. She'd been so proud she cried through the entire ceremony. Ria was there for my retirement, now a colonel herself, running her own wing. We'd stayed close through the years, our friendship one of those rare things that deepens with time rather than fading. She gave a speech that was funny and heartfelt, and I had to work hard not to cry in front of 200 people. What surprised me most wasn't the ceremony itself, but the feeling that came after. I'd spent 3.5 decades in uniform, moving from base to base, assignment to assignment, always focused on the next mission, the next challenge, the next rank. And then, suddenly, it was over. I bought a small house near the coast, North Carolina, where the air smells like salt and pine. It had a dock, a kayak I actually used, and enough quiet that I could finally hear myself think. For the first few months, I didn't do much of anything. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I took long walks. I learned to cook more than 3 meals. I let myself be still. It was harder than I expected. For 36 years, my identity had been built around service. Around rank, responsibility, and the knowledge that people depended on me to make the right calls. Without that structure, I felt unmoored. Not lost, exactly, but uncertain about who I was when I wasn't Colonel Milton, or General Milton, or the officer everyone came to when things got complicated. Ria called me one evening about 6 months into retirement. "How's civilian life?" "Weird." She laughed. "Yeah, it is. You getting used to it?" "Slowly. Some days I wake up and forget I don't have a briefing at 0700. Give it time. It gets easier." "Does it?" "Eventually. You start remembering who you were before the uniform. Or you figure out who you want to be now that you're not wearing it." I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. Who had I been before the uniform? A girl from a modest household, raised by a mother who worked too hard and a father who died too young. A girl who wanted to prove herself, who craved structure and purpose and a place where effort actually mattered. And who was I now? That was the harder question. I started volunteering at a veteran center about a year into retirement. It wasn't much at first, just helping younger vets navigate VA paperwork, offering advice on transitioning to civilian careers, listening when they needed someone who understood what they'd left behind. But it felt good. Useful. Like I still had something to contribute. One afternoon, I was sitting in the center's small office when a young woman in her late 20s walked in. She had the posture of someone who'd served, shoulders back, movements efficient, but her face carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting battles long after she took off the uniform. "I'm looking for General Milton," she said. "That's me. Though you can just call me Sam." She hesitated, then sat down across from me. "I heard you helped people transition out. I could use some help." "What branch?" "Army. Got out 6 months ago. E5. I thought I had a plan, but everything fell apart." I knew that feeling. "Tell me what's going on." She talked for nearly an hour. About the job she couldn't keep because her anxiety made it hard to focus. About the family that didn't understand why she wasn't over it yet. About the shame of feeling like she'd failed at civilian life after succeeding in the military. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "You didn't fail. You're adjusting. That takes time. Everyone acts like I should just move on. Everyone who hasn't served, maybe. People who have no better." She looked at me, her eyes damp. "How long did it take you to adjust?" I thought about it. "I'm still working on it. But it gets easier. You start building a new identity. One that includes your service, but isn't defined by it. I don't know who I am without the uniform." Neither did I. "That's normal." We talked for a while longer, and before she left, I gave her my number. "Call me if you need someone to talk to. Or if you just need someone to remind you that you're not crazy." "Thank you, ma'am." "Sam." She smiled, just a little. "Thank you, Sam." That interaction became the first of many. Word spread that there was a retired general at the center who actually gave a damn, and soon I was meeting with a few vets a week. Some just needed practical help. Others needed to be heard by someone who understood what they'd left behind. I didn't have all the answers, but I had time, and I had experience, and that seemed to be enough. It gave me purpose again. Not the same purpose I'd had in uniform, but something quieter, more personal. I wasn't leading operations or making policy decisions. I was just helping people figure out the next step. And it felt good. One evening, about 2 years into retirement, I got a call from Jordan. We hadn't spoken much over the years, occasional holiday texts, brief updates when someone in the family passed, but his voice sounded strained. "Emma, it's Jordan." "Hey, everything okay?" "Not really. It's Aunt Lorraine." I felt my chest tighten. "What happened?" "She's dying. Cancer. The doctors say she has maybe a few weeks." I sat down slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that. She's been asking for you." I closed my eyes. "Jordan, I know. I know things have been complicated. But she's scared, Emma. And I think she has things she wants to say." I didn't respond right away. 30 years had passed since the confrontation. 30 years since I'd set boundaries and walked away from a relationship that had only ever hurt me. In that time, Lorraine and I had existed in parallel worlds, aware of each other, but never intersecting. I'd heard updates through the family. She'd struggled after I stopped helping. She'd eventually stabilized, found other people to lean on, lived a life that didn't include me. And I'd done the same. I thought about going to see her. About sitting at her bedside and hearing whatever apology or justification or plea she'd finally worked up the courage to say. But I also thought about who I'd been 30 years ago, desperate for her approval, willing to absorb her cruelty, convinced that family meant enduring harm without complaint. And I thought about who I was now, a woman who'd built a life on her own terms, who'd learned the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, who understood that some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened. "Jordan," I said carefully, "I appreciate you calling. But I don't think I'm going to visit." He was quiet for a moment. "She really wants to see you." "I'm sure she does. But wanting something doesn't mean you're owed it." "Emma, she's dying." "I know. And I'm sorry she's suffering. But I made peace with our relationship a long time ago. I don't need to reopen it now." "What if she wants to apologize?" "Then I hope it brings her peace." But I don't need to hear it. Jordan sighed. I don't understand how you can just not care. I do care. I care about the person I was when she hurt me, and I care about protecting the person I am now. Sometimes caring means knowing when to stay away. He didn't argue. We talked for a few more minutes, and when we hung up, I felt a deep, quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. Lorraine died 3 weeks later. I didn't attend the funeral. I sent flowers with a simple card, my condolences to the family. Talia called afterward, her voice tight with anger. You didn't even come. No, I didn't. She was your Aunt Emma. She was. And she spent years making me feel worthless. I grieved that relationship a long time ago. You're so cold. I'm not cold, Talia. I'm just not willing to pretend our relationship was something it wasn't. She hung up on me. I set my phone down and sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the water. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt clear. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for closure that never comes. They revisit old wounds, replay old arguments, convince themselves that one more conversation will finally make everything make sense. But I'd learned something in 36 years of service. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you give yourself. And I'd given it to myself 3 decades ago, the day I stopped waiting for Lorraine to see me and started seeing myself instead. The years that followed were some of the best of my life. I deepened my work at the Veterans Center, eventually helping to expand its programs. I reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I'd never had time to visit, and spent long, unhurried mornings on the water. I dated briefly a retired Navy captain I met at a conference, but it didn't last. We wanted different things. She wanted someone to fill her time. I wanted someone who understood that I'd already spent a lifetime building myself and wasn't interested in reshaping for someone else's comfort. We parted amicably, and I didn't mourn it. Rhea visited often. She'd retired a few years after me, and we fell into an easy rhythm: dinners, long walks, conversations that ranged from silly to profound. She was the closest thing I had to family, and I was grateful for her every single day. One evening, we were sitting on my porch, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Regret what? Cutting Lorraine out. Not going to see her before she died. I thought about it. No, I don't. Not even a little? Not even a little. I paused. I spent too many years letting her define my worth. I'm not going to spend my retirement second-guessing the boundaries I set. Rhea nodded. Good. We sat in silence for a while, the sound of the water lapping against the dock filling the space between us. Then she said, You know what I admire most about you? What? You're not afraid to be disliked. I smiled. I wasn't always like that. I know. That's what makes it impressive. I thought about the young lieutenant I'd been, desperate to prove herself, terrified of disappointing anyone. I thought about the major who'd finally stood up to her aunt, shaking but resolute. I thought about the colonel who'd learned to lead without needing applause. And I thought about the general I'd become, confident, clear, and unshakable. It had taken me decades to get here. Decades of work, reflection, and the willingness to walk away from people and situations that diminished me. But I'd made it. And sitting there on my porch, with my best friend beside me and the rest of my life stretching out ahead of me, I finally understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't about escaping responsibility. It wasn't about avoiding hard conversations or cutting people off at the first sign of conflict. It was about knowing your worth deeply, unshakably, irrevocably, and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. It was about choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of the recognition that you deserve the same respect, kindness, and consideration you've spent your whole life giving others. It was about understanding that some relationships aren't meant to last, and that's okay. That you can grieve what they could have been without sacrificing who you've become. And it was about building a life that feels right, not perfect, not impressive, but authentically, undeniably yours. I'd done that. And I was proud of it. The stars began to appear, faint at first, then brighter as the sky deepened. Rhea stood, stretched, and said she should get going. I walked her to her car, hugged her goodbye, and watched her drive away. Then I went back to the porch, sat in my chair, and let the night settle around me. Somewhere, in a memory I no longer revisited often, Lorraine was whispering to a room full of people that I had a sugar daddy. That I was disgusting. That I hadn't earned anything I'd achieved. But that version of me, young, hurt, desperate for approval, was gone. In her place was a woman who'd spent 36 years serving her country, leading with integrity, and refusing to let anyone rewrite her story. A woman who'd learned that the people who truly matter don't need to be convinced of your worth. They see it, celebrate it, and never ask you to shrink. A woman who'd walked away from toxicity not with anger, but with clarity. A woman who'd finally, fully, completely stepped into the version of herself who felt free. And that woman, retired, gray-haired, sitting on a porch overlooking the water, didn't need Lorraine's apology. She didn't need closure from someone who'd never understood her. She didn't need anything except this, the quiet knowledge that she'd lived her life on her own terms, with her head high and her integrity intact. The rest was just noise. And after 36 years of service, 30 years of peace, and a lifetime of learning who she really was, she'd finally learned to tune it out. I smiled, took a deep breath, and let it all go. The past, the hurt, the weight of expectations I'd never asked for. All of it. And in its place, I felt something I'd spent my whole life searching for: peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of something stronger. The unshakable certainty that I was exactly who I was supposed to be. And that was more than enough. That moment changed more than my career. It changed the way I let people treat me. And honestly, I'm better for it. If you've ever had to distance yourself from someone who refused to respect you, tell me what finally pushed you to draw the line. Did they apologize? Did they double down? Or did you walk away for good? Drop your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more real stories about choosing yourself, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You never know, the next story might be the one you needed to hear.